Hi guys, I am Layla Letitia from Layla's Light. I help you shift your mindset and I also help you manage your mindset towards success. So today is the first installment of the mini trainings I'm going to be offering from Layla's Lights, okay? Now today's topic of training is going to be negative self-talk. The purpose of this training is to identify what negative self-talk is. We're going to talk about the four the types of negative self-talk that there is. We're going to talk about the toxic effects that it may have on us if we continue to not manage our negative self-talk. And we're going to talk about a few ways to manage our negative self-talk. Okay? Now, guys, what is negative self-talk? Okay? Now, basically, what negative self-talk is the inner dialogue that we have with ourselves that may be limiting our abilities to believe in ourselves and our abilities, and it can prevent us from reaching our full potential. Now, negative self-talk is any thought that diminishes you and your ability to make positive changes, and it also diminishes your confidence in your ability to do so. Now, what are four forms of negative self-talk? Okay, the first one we're going to talk about is personalizing. Personalizing. So, what it means when I say that a negative self-talk is personalizing, what it means is that if something bad happens, you automatically blame yourself. Okay, so it's all about self. I know a lot of times I used to say, you know, like for instance, I was in a really, really bad relationship and suppose my boyfriend didn't come home at nighttime and he was maybe with someone else. I blame myself for that because I'm like, oh my gosh, if I was a better girlfriend or if I was more understanding, if I didn't say this, he would be home. So again, it's when you blame yourself automatically, even when it's not your fault. Okay. Right along is that filtering. So filtering is such a problem because what it is that you magnify the negative aspect of a situation. Okay, it's kind of like you magnify the negative aspects of the situation, and you kind of like turn a blind eye to anything else. So there can be something good happening, some positive stuff going on, but you totally ignore all that and you only focus on the negative aspects of the situation. Next, catastrophizing. Now, this one is a big, big one. With this, you automatically anticipate the worst. Okay, now this is very, very dangerous. And the example that I like to use when I talk about catastrophizing is that suppose you have an interview. Okay, I've asked people, you have an interview? I'm not gonna get a job anyways. So I'm like, so if you go into an interview already telling yourself that you're not going to get the job, think about how are you going to perform well at the interview if you're already telling yourself that you're not going to get the job. Chances are you're going to perform poorly at that interview. Now, polarizing is also very dangerous because you only see things as good or bad, and there is absolutely no middle ground. So if you kind of feel that you have to be perfect at certain things, and when you're not perfect, it's total failure, right? It's total failure. You don't even believe that you can improve, do something differently because it's total failure. So again, polarizing can be very, very dangerous because it only allows you to see things as good or bad, and there's no middle ground. Now, some toxic effects of negative self-talk. Now, there's a lot of toxic effects, right? Now, we're going to talk about just a couple here in this short training today, but we're going to talk about the limited thinking, right? The limited thinking, right? So, if you tell yourself you can't do something and you keep repeatedly telling yourself that you can't do something, guess what's going to happen? You are going to believe that you cannot do it, right? The power of the mind, power of the mindset. You tell yourself you can't. Guess what? You won't. And we have perfectionism. Now, perfectionism can be very dangerous because when you begin to really believe that great isn't as good as perfect and that perfection is actually attainable, it can be very problematic for you. Now, in complete contrast, They're high achievers. So we're calling these high achievers. We're not calling them perfectionists, we're calling them high achievers. High achievers, they tend to do better than their perfectionist counterparts because they generally stress less and they're happy with a job well done because they don't spend their time zeroing in or picking out what they could have done better, right? They're happy with a job well done. Next, we have the feelings of depression. Now, this is a very, 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 very negative component of negative self-talk because there has been research that has shown that negative self-talk can lead to overwhelming feelings of depression. And when you have that overwhelming feeling of depression, it can lead to manic depression, deep depression. And if this is left unchecked, of course, it can be very, very, very damaging. And a lot of people, they do fear going to therapy because they feel if they go to therapy that it is a weakness. But going to therapy is more of a sign of strength than ever a weakness because that means that you have identified that there's a problem within you and you want to fix it, which is not a weakness. It is a strength for sure. Now, relationship challenges. Now, whether the constant criticism, it may make you seem needy or insecure, but sometimes you turn your negative self-talk into more general negative habits that bothers others or the lack of communication or even the playful amount of criticism can take its toll on a relationship. So a lot of times we let that negative self-talk, we let that, blossom into negative habits. Okay. So we want to be very, very careful about, you know, letting that negative self-talk affect our relationships. Now, how do we manage negative self-talk, right? How do we manage this thing that we all have, right? We all have that inner critic inside of us. And of course, it's when that inner critic becomes excessively negative where we need to watch out for it, okay? Now, one way that we can go ahead and manage our negative self-talk is that we can catch our self-critic. We can catch him. Catch him in the act, right? So when you learn to notice when you're being self-critical, and ways that you can tell you're being self-critical is that you would tell yourself something that you would never tell your child, your family, a friend. You would never say certain things to certain people, but we would say them to ourselves because we are very self-critical of ourselves. What you want to do is you want to ask yourself, is there any evidence to support that self-thought you have? Is there any evidence to support it, right? Or you ask yourself, is your thought factual or is it just your interpretation? And be very mindful of interpretation. And I'll talk about me again. I like to talk about myself in personal components when I actually give training. So I set a weight that I don't want to pass. Okay. So I give myself a weight and I don't want to get past that weight. And if I get close to that weight or that exact weight, I would consider myself as being fat. So in reality, I do know that I'm not fat, but my interpretation of me meeting that weight as being fat. Okay. So I know for me, so my cousin always corrects me and she says, "You're not fat, you're just a little thicker." So there you have it, a little personal story of me. Okay. Moving right along. You can give your negative critic a name. Now, how awesome is this that you can give your negative critic a name? Her name is Anya. So whenever I am down on myself and I'm having my moments of negative self-talk, my moments of negativity, I call her Anya, okay? Now, when you think of your inner critic as a force outside of yourself, and if you give it like a goofy name, it's not only more easy to realize that you don't have to agree with it, but it becomes less threatening and more easy to see how ridiculous some of our critical thoughts can be, right? So again, changing, give yourself your negative critic a name. It's kind of like it helps you think outside of yourself, right? So it's a great way to manage your negative self-talk. Next, this is a very, very, very important one, is that you want to change your negativity into a neutral stance, okay? Now, what do I mean into a neutral stance? What I mean is that when we're engaged in our negative self-talk, you may be able to catch yourself, but there are some times when it's difficult to force yourself to stop the train of thought, in its tracks because you already are engaged in the thought, right? But It's often far easier to change the intensity of your language, right? So when you're in the negative thought, if you change the intensity of your language, for example, instead of saying I can't stand this, and you say this is, challenging, or instead of saying I hate it or hate this, you say I don't like it or I don't prefer this. When your self-talk uses more gentle language, much of the negative power is muted or diminished, because once you change the language you're using, then your negative self-talk doesn't have power anymore. Okay. And finally, you need to change your perspective, right? So you want to change your perspective. How do you change your perspective? Now, sometimes looking at things in the long term can help you realize that you may be placing too much emphasis on something right now, right? It might not be as bad as you think. So for example, you may ask yourself, is something that is upsetting you right now or causing you some problems, like, will it matter in an hour? Will it matter in a day? Will it matter in a week, a month, a year? Like, will it matter, right? Now, another way to shift our perspective is to imagine that you are panning out and looking at your problem from a big distance, okay? Now, the example that I like to use when I give this training is that imagine you are in an airplane and you're in the sky and you're looking down, right? When you look down, everything seems so tiny, right? It's so tiny, right? So seeing the tiny things below can remind you that most of your worries aren't as big as they seem. Now, this often can minimize the negativity, the fear, and the urgency in our negative self-talk. So there you have it, guys, our first mini training on negative self-talk. I hope this training was informative, that it had impact on you. And if you have any questions about this training, please don't hesitate to add a comment. I will answer all comments. See you in the next training. Signing off, guys, Layla Letitia. Again, I help you shift your mindset and also help you manage your mindset towards success. Until next time.